Poor spider, I will burn your home in order to escape. And when the darkness grows into my heavily loaded back, I'll shake it off my shoulders and I'll follow my own track.
Okay, everyone. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Nick.
And together we are the Vagabonds. Today we have a very interesting guest, an old friend of mine. Well, not that old, but that I met when I was doing. We were both doing work getting kidnapped children back from overseas, as you will read about in chapters 8 and 9 of our book, Vagabonds, Tourists in the Heart of Darkness. And name is Catherine MacWillie, and believe it or not, she was a cop.
But this is really special because normally we don't normally interview law enforcement. It's the other way around.
Yeah. Usually we're being
and we're wearing bracelets.
Although this is our second police officer in a row.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Episode 2 was also a police officer.
Well, yeah, the other guy, the guy was from homicide. You know how they are.
So anyway, Catherine, why don't you tell us a little about? Start with your life story. How did you wind up becoming an LAPD cop? What did you do while you were an LAPD cop? And then a little bit about what you've done since.
Police officer.
Actually, I like cop. I like policeman. I'm kind of old school, but no, I actually come from a military family, and we were raised with responsibility to God, country, family. And so when I was younger, I looked at becoming an officer, but I didn't meet the height requirement. I think back then it was 5'10", and I'm 5'4". So fast forward a few years, and the height requirement was additionally ultimately lowered. And at that time, I was looking at changing careers, and so the timing just worked out. I was then 28 years old, so I was a little bit older, becoming a police officer. A lot of the cadets going in the academy right now, or for some time, have been 21, or after Vietnam and Korea, all military. So that's kind of that direction, and I actually processed with 3 different departments, but LAPD was the first one that called. So, and I like their uniforms better.
Don't worry about
the sheriff's
height
department.
requirement.
The sheriff's department was the brown and green. I like the dark navy blue.
There you go.
Anyway, but I just, the law enforcement and responsibility to the community and country just all really fit with that. And you couldn't ask for a better department. And all the guys that trained me were 17 to 20 years on the department. And that's all when a lot of things were changing. Police vests were new. My partner didn't wear a police vest. I would remind him about it. The computers in the cars were relatively new. The department had transitioned from the key boxes and radios and checked in to, the handsets. So a lot of things were new. My class, we were graduating, half of those were women, and that was the largest group of women to come on the department. It was, as a result of other women officers who had filed lawsuits against the department, not only to work the field, but to show the value of women on the department.
Was that during Gates's administration?
Yes, and I met Chief Gates several times, and still think and feel like he was a great chief.
He was one of my father's best friends.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Great chief. I think to this day, we still somewhat miss him, us old timers. And then I was just fortunate. On probation, I had a great time and worked with all these great officers. And then throughout my career, I worked the jail, I was actually one of the oldest officers working the field, three of the oldest officers working the field in my division when I retired, the oldest officer, female officer working the field when I retired. I worked a lot of specialized units, DUI task forces, vice task forces, you know, just, child abuse investigations, Hollywood division, North Hollywood division, all great units. And Hollywood, what can I say? Hollywood is Hollywood. I had the fire department respond and climbing up the ladder to enter buildings that were vacated to look for runaway children, and climbing under the freeway underpasses to look for children who were runaways. It was just an unusual time.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah,
Heartbreaking.
it was heartbreaking, and it still is heartbreaking. And I eventually started doing my own research on family law and divorce and custody as a result of what I was seeing on the streets and what I was experiencing. For instance, when I first came on the department, rarely did we deal with a family law case. And then fast forward 10, 15 years, and there are some days when I was on the department when all of our radio calls were related to family law all day long. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, start and end of all, school breaks, custody issues now. Police stations look like more like child care centers because people were seeking the safety of the police department to exchange custody of the children. So all our benches and seating areas were taken up with children and families looking to exchange from one parent to the other. An increase in homicides and suicides related to custody. I mean, I think, Jeff, one time when you and I did an interview, I talked about a case where I could still remember exactly where I was standing when we had to tell a mother that the father had killed both the children. And it just, the scream in the station as she was being given the information as sensitively and as privately as we could provide in a station. We had a private room for her, and it just, the scream never left me.
Yeah, I imagine that.
Yeah. And anything that deals with affairs of the heart and emotions is dark waters to be sailing in. Simply
and now,
put, that's when it gets down to the family, and the family's the cause of the children being displaced, and that's a tragedy, and it's hard to navigate through things like that.
yeah, I mean, it's only gotten worse. I mean, now I send some of my clients to court in bulletproof vests. I now, Jeff, specialize in threat assessments and safety plans. I script out what a parent will say to the children, when after they move from the family residence, if they're hiding, what to do if they see mommy or daddy, because I represent both parents. When I say that, I don't mean I represent the mother and the father at the same time. I represent same number of mothers as I do fathers. I'm really here to help mothers and fathers ensure that they have a relationship with both children, ensure that they are as safe as possible for as long as necessary, and also to make as few problems for each other, and to get out of court as quickly as possible and to minimize the damage that we're creating in family law. And you know about that because you've gone into these countries and taken the children back with legal cause, of course, and protocols. But you have some amazing experiences. That's how we first started collaborating. Talking.
Legal cause from our point of view, but not necessarily legal cause from the point of view of the country that you're in at the time. That's the
which is the other half of this coin are the missing children in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw a statistic the other day. It said something like 2.5 million children into the human trafficking systems. I think in the last 5 years or something like that. And I'm sure that number is a low number. You
Well,
know,
let me just tell you, suicides by children is another issue. There was a case a few years ago when a child as young as 6 years old took their life as a result of their parents' divorce. He actually had been watching cartoons with his sister and walked out of the room, went into the kitchen, took his belt off and strung it around his neck on the refrigerator door and hung himself. And the concept,
Six,
a
he was
concept
6 years old? That's incredible.
6 years old. The concept that a child that young could even understand what was happening, it was inconceivable to this police department, to his parents, to everyone in that community. They actually assigned 4 detectives to the case to investigate it because they couldn't believe this was possible. And in fact, that's exactly what the investigation proved. And there have been children under the age of 7. It's still rare that commit suicide, but you have a lot of teens, even in my own community. In a small suburb outside of Los Angeles, a 14-year-old child committed suicide over their parents' divorce. And in fact, you have a lot of adults. I mean, I still remember having to hike into a location in Griffith Park where somebody had hung themselves as a result of their divorce, and they had been there for several days.
part of that's the philosophy. You know, the culture that we grew up in, we were 9-year-old on a bicycle, like a group of nomads, like Visigoths. We'd leave it early in the morning and come back when it started getting dark with our loot and adventures, usually with trepidation that somebody had seen what we'd been up to and called our mother, who was the head snitch to the old man. But that's gone. We no longer have that community interwoven thing that the sisterhood put together, which is, I'll tell you what your children are doing if you tell me what mine are doing. We don't have them.
We had at least one parent. You know, there's one parent who's home. Traditionally, when we grew up, that was mothers, and the mothers in the neighborhoods all collaborated with each other and told on each other's kids. And
Right.
Now we've lost all that because we don't have a parent in a lot of homes. It'd be that mothers or fathers, because we have fathers now that are stay-at-home dads doing wonderful jobs. But the reality is that we've lost some of those benefits. And you know, with a larger population, you have a group of people who now have mental health issues, personality disorders, and some people are just terrible, sick people, you know, serial killers and child abusers and so on. And now, you know, deviating that a little bit, but going back to the issue of child abuse, you know, now false child abuse allegations, false domestic violence allegations, false restraining orders are the norm. It's the silver bullet to the fastest, surest way to social and physical custody. And I always qualify that by saying there absolutely are legitimate cases of child abuse, domestic violence, and restraining orders. I'm dealing with the false allegations. And we have people, I think, Jeff, you and I had a discussion or an interview where we talked about people who've been released from prison after their children became adults 18 years later, 19 years later, who came to the district attorney's office and said, I'm sorry, my parent is in prison because I was a child and I was coerced into making false allegations, but I was never abused. And even though parents argued that they were incarcerated or being prosecuted because of false allegations, the jury didn't believe them, because we always want to protect the child, police officers, juries, everything. So there's a predisposition to that effect.
The one I love was these therapists that would come up with these recovered memories from people that from 30 years ago, you know, that and then same case, you know, that it's all ideas that have been put in their head, and then they make the accusation somebody suffers because of that, but the therapist never pays for having put the, you know, the idea in the person's head when there was actually no evidence of a crime.
What was it? The McMurton Preschool?
Yeah,
Wasn't
Good.
that?
good example.
That was in LA, wasn't it?
Well, you know, and I was just going to bring up the McMartin case. It doesn't just, suggestibility doesn't just occur in adults, it occurs in juveniles.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
McMartin case, you know, the children had said that there was, you know, these underground tunnels, that there was blood sacrifices, and all of these things happened. And so they actually bulldozed the lot, and they actually dug in, and none of the children's statements of tunnels underneath and blood sacrifices. It was just a case that completely went off the rails and, you know, captured the media's attention. Again, we're predisposed to wanting to believe everything that a child says is true. And that's not to say that children don't sometimes or absolutely tell the truth. But it doesn't take away that the suggestibility of children is a pretty prevailing thought process that does still exist on both sides. When is the child telling truth and when is the child lying? It's hard to tell because, you know, children can be so convincing, and that's a terrible price that's being paid now. You know, there's terms that are being argued over where the reality is that children are being taught to love only one parent and to hate the other. And so I try to stay away from some of those names and just go by, this is what the court order says and this is what's happening. The child is being withheld, and both parents aren't having frequent and ongoing contact. And, you know, and try to get away from some of those names because, you know, the 5 personality disorders, parents want to say, oh, they're the 5 personality disorders. Well, the problem is in today's society, according to the experts, we almost all of us have some sort of personality disorder or, you know, a behavior that, you know, is not healthy. But because of the laws that we have in place, that society demands that we drive a certain speed limit, if we don't work and go to work with the employer, we'll be fired. There's a natural consequence that takes in place, but not in family law. In fact, if anything, family law is completely counterintuitive. Everything that you believe in right and wrong doesn't really occur in family law. What you think will happen if the other parent lies does not happen. What you think will happen when the other parent withholds custody doesn't happen. In fact, part of that is because the law in many states only allow on contempts, jails, or fines. There's a few that will allow some leeway for bonds. But when parents go to court, they think, oh my God, I've got 150 complaints, contempts, and they violated the court orders. And in one case that I'm familiar with, the judge did find in favor of the parent, but then only fined them $1. So what did the other parent do? Oh, they just escalated their behavior because they got a get out of jail free card. And what's $1 for each contempt for withholding? So I've actually had to do a lot of thinking out of the box to do workarounds for what are limitations sometimes that the judges have. Now, does that mean that I think every judge does a great job? Well, the problem is we've put an unbelievable expectation that judges can tell exactly when each parent is lying by how much is an exaggeration. They have to do it in 30 seconds or less. They hardly get any time to review the files. Part fortune teller, who's going to be the better parent, and not only to the child, but to the other parent. And so now the expectation is that all parents lie, that all parents violate the court orders. And so we've lost this natural consequence that we have everywhere else. So of course we have nothing but lawlessness. Perjury is rampant. False allegations are rampant. And so what happens is we often end up ruling in favor of the parent who looks the best, sounds the best, and has an attorney at the end. So that means a lot of good parents are losing custody of their children because they're under trauma. They don't look the best, they don't sound the best, and they can't afford an attorney anymore.
Yeah, that's sad. It's really sad. I want to talk about, well, because you're in or near Los Angeles. I spent 2 days in Los Angeles over the summer.
You know what? I'm sorry you were a little garbled on my end,
Oh,
so you'll have to
I
repeat what
see.
you said.
You're in the LA area, and I spent a couple of days there in August. That city does not seem to function at all anymore on any level. I mean, I was amazed at how a mess it is. And I think if you were 28 again right now, would you want to be on LAPD again?
Oh,
The way things are today?
My heart goes out to every single officer across this country, because it used to be if an officer made a mistake, because it's not like we come in from another planet and land here and become an officer. We're human. We will make mistakes. We will sometimes hear information that causes us to make a decision because someone has lied to us, misrepresented things to us. And so, we will make mistakes. We are human. And we used to be able to be given some latitude. Well, now the expectation that we will be perfect on every single case, in every single scenario. It means that there's no latitude for imperfection. There's no latitude for mistakes. And on the other hand, even if we do everything exactly right, we can still be prosecuted because we're second guessed on every single decision. And now we've monetized a lack of respect for officers. We've monetized the ability for people to run from officers, to fight officers after they run from us, to not put their hands up. We've monetized all of those lawsuits. So even when we do everything right, they are still, if we have to fight somebody at the end of a run, an entanglement. And that's not to say that sometimes officers have literally made bad decisions. And we do have officers who've made bad decisions. And we do have officers who have made and been criminals. But by and large, the majority of all officers come on the department because they want to give back to their communities. They want to do a good job. They want to protect the public. And yet so many of the decisions being made now are made by attorneys who want to sue the departments on behalf of their clients who are criminals.
It is rolled over into the military too.
Yeah.
Especially with the rules of engagement, like in Iraq and Afghanistan. Real simple case was the E7 and the captain that went down to the Afghan commander's building and rescued a 9-year-old boy that had been chained to his bunk for sexual pleasure. And the E7 threw him on the ground, and he ended up being forced out of the army and charged.
Well, the military at one point actually started, my understanding was that they adopted the use of force of LAPD.
Yeah.
The problem is as a military family, that would be fine if you were a police department, but the military goes into war zones. They are not a police department. They are a war machine brought in. Now, does that mean that, I'm not standing in defense of innocent citizens who have been, and we've made mistakes in wars before, Vietnam, and some other wars. But by and far, you cannot take, in my personal opinion, cannot take some of the decisions that we're making on the police departments and apply it to a military environment. Certainly in peacetime, that's a different scenario. but you're talking about an entirely different environment. And I agree with you, the military. And like I said, we've had some elite members in our family. My grandfather was in the military in Japan in peacetime and negotiated. And, my dad is a retired military officer. My sister's sons were in the military. We even have, my brother is in possession of the Civil War swords from my family that fought on the side of the
Oh,
North.
wow.
By the way, he did not disclose after my parents' death. And boy, my sister and I would have been in there arguing over, hey, let's draw straws on this. And my brother was like, hey, those swords that my mom, that mom had? I think I'd like that. Oh, okay. Go
Yeah.
ahead. And
And
my uncle had one of the other swords that went down in a boat that sunk. So, my brother had a lot of military history that the rest of the family didn't necessarily have, because he spent a lot of time with my grandfather on the East Coast.
see, that's where they go bad, when you leave them alone with grandpa. And I can testify to this, is that I was in super secret probation for almost a year after I taught my buddy's granddaughter how to light her body gases with a kitchen match. And she went to show and tell at school and did it there.
Hey,
I came back, the entire population.
I have a few scars fighting with my brother and sister, but you know what? You couldn't imagine a closer family. I love my brother and sister.
Oh, yeah. Well,
that's what siblings
I'm proud
do.
of my family service too.
Yeah.
And if your sister is a snitch, it's all right to take a cattle prod to her.
Sorry. I might have done that when I was younger, but no, not now.
Oh, yeah, they always are. They always are. I'm going to tell you.
So you're still 100% active with custody calculations?
Yeah, so I actually lecture now, Jeff. I was in Rome in 2019 before COVID locked down in 2020. Presenting at a International Academy of Law and Mental Health conference, which is held once every 2 years. And experts come around from around the world to lecture on mental health and the law. And I was excited to have the opportunity. I had several judges from around the world in my conference class. And then I lectured all around the United States. I also had a taping that was done for a presentation in Berlin dealing with adolescent behavior and psychology, dealing with family law. I also lecture, like for instance, a couple of presentations I'm working on now is dealing with contempt emotions are notoriously in effect, do this instead. And then homicides, murder, suicides, and abductions, why threat assessments and safety plans are necessary in family law. The headlines around the country show that this is not just a problem in the United States, but globally in all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Disintegration of Western society.
Well, that's interesting. And I see you traveling all the time on Facebook. I didn't know some of it was for work.
Well, what I do
just
is
it was all vacation.
Well, no. So what I usually try to do is a conference and then attach another 3 to 4 weeks. Although I wasn't able to do that when I went to the Antarctica.
There's not a lot of family law issues there.
Where?
Antarctica.
Well, Doc Wong went down there, so
I
there may
thought
be
he was-
soon.
Yeah, we have a friend who I think is there now.
Yeah.
In Antarctica.
Amazing bucket trip, definitely amazing.
Yeah.
And this was the ship that I was on. The reason why I jumped into that cruise was because it was one of the first collaborations between a civilian ship and scientists. So we had scientists who were on board. The food's a lot better. The cabins are certainly a lot better than some of the scientific vessels, and for certainly a fraction of the cost, which is why it was appealing to so many of the scientists. And it was really, a lot of these expedition leaders that are on these cruise ships, these people have PhDs. They're hugely intelligent and highly educated, and they really were proactive in seeking out the scientists. So we had scientists who were tagging whales. We had scientists who were tracking krill, because all these vitamins that are krill infused, that we're taking, they're affecting the whale feeding, and in the whole
Ecosystem.
thank you.
Food chain.
I'm switching here from family law to ecosystem. But
Yeah.
then we have another person who's been in submarines, is tracking the trash on the bottom of the oceans, and another scientist who was one of the great grandchildren of the British explorer Scott, who actually died in his pursuit of reaching one of the poles. I don't remember any longer if it was the North Pole or South Pole. He was one of our expedition leaders. So he talked about his family and his history, and another gal who was there talking about the migration of the animals. And you could go out, we would go out 4 hours in the morning. About then, that's when your toes would start going numb. And by the way, I had like 3 layers on my feet and heavy boots, and 3 layers on my legs, and 3 layers on my hands and chest and hats. And 4 hours was about the max I could proceed. But I did do the polar plunge, and I did put up my own tent. Oh yeah, polar plunge. They tied a rope.
The polar
They tied a
plunge.
rope on you,
You took the
and
polar plunge?
and you jump off the back end of the ship into the ocean. And your
How many scientists? How many scientists were on this boat? Approximately.
There was 87 passengers, and I think it was like 12. So it was a very low capacity.
What was the water temperature?
They didn't care. They had obviously that many scientists. They got at least 3 stills cooking vodka.
And you have a doctor.
They
You have a
probably
doctor.
thought they were in Palm Springs.
Oh yeah, no, I'm telling you, you jumped in, and they had ropes, so in case you went into a coma,
To
they
haul
could
you
direct
back in. Yeah. Yeah, good.
And one of the gals who was there, she was tutoring somebody. She happened to have been a competitive swimmer. And when she got off, now I was the second person going in. I was going to be the first person, but this really shy woman jumped in front of me and said, "Could I go first?" And I'm like, okay. Turns out she had been swimming with the sharks in the south of South Africa. And I'm going like, she did not look like she had that type of personality. She was very quiet on the ship, but she did a great job on the polar plunge, and they gave us a shot of vodka afterwards.
Those little quiet ones always confuse American couple.
Oh yeah, but this one competitive swimmer, she dove off the boat. She did a dive. When she came back, she said, "Might have dove a little far on that one."
Yeah. Everything is frozen.
Oh yeah,
All
and
of
then I had been the last person to sign on the cruise. And so I had wanted to camp out on Antarctica, and they only allow you a limited number of people to go on Antarctica. And this one woman, she was coughing, and I said, "I understand that you have a camping spot." And I said, "If you don't feel well, can I have your spot?" She turns to me and she says, "Honey, if I'm on my deathbed, you're not getting my spot."
True.
So let me tell you, those spots were really prime. And then then they also and then we would come back, have lunch, and then another lecture. Then we go out for another 4 hours. And I have to tell you, I'm going to give a little advertising spot here for Swoop. I have booked through them. They're a UK company. They did an amazing job. And the ship we were on was amazing. And all the expedition leaders were from around the world: Britain, US, South Africa, Israel. We had one gal that used to be in the Israeli army. And we had to guess what the backgrounds were of all these expedition leaders. One was a professional motorcycle racer from South Africa. I mean, it was just the most amazing.
Next time we do something death-defying, we should add a cruise to it.
Yeah.
Charge a premium price.
Yeah.
And a hefty fine if you cancel.
I still want to go to the North Pole and do the polar bears.
Well, that could be done in 2 different ways.
Yeah.
One, because you're not a fast runner, and two, standing on one of those 4-wheel drives that's 12 feet above ground and tossing chunks of meat to the little bear. Or just go to Russia. They seem to actually drink with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in Russia, I don't think I'll be going there for a while.
Anyway, a lot of people's list right now.
So what are your plans in the future? You going to continue doing this, lecturing and traveling around the world and giving conferences, or?
Well, definitely it's making sure, I don't take a lot of clients because, unlike some law firms where they have a lot of people, a lot of attorneys handling a lot of cases with varying amounts of education and experience, I only take a small group of clients, and sometimes I run a waiting list. And, part of what I do now is part of my DNA. It's like when I retired from the police department, I thought, you know what? After 24 years, I'm really at the top of my game. The department is losing somebody with all this education, all this training. And part of me wanted to stay. In fact, the last day I came in for work, both my captains were there. And I said, Captain, what are you doing here? He goes, nobody believes we're taking bets. Nobody believed you would actually leave, because I loved my job as much as the last day as I did the first day. In fact, I'm planning my 40th reunion for my LAPD Academy class for next year.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like that's what the kids nowadays, I don't know how many of them will be able to feel the same love for my job. I'm very proud of my career and how I worked, my commitment, and I do this commitment to clients. So, I'm trying to figure out a way to take all that knowledge and provide it to a larger base for less money, because parents, when they pick the wrong attorneys, they pay a terrible price, or attorneys who are young and inexperienced. And that especially affects high conflict families, or families with special needs, or parents with special needs. One woman I interviewed, she was in a horrific accident and had brain injuries. Her husband was unable to cope. Or, the same of husbands who are in terrible accidents, and their wives are unable.
Let me throw a trick question in here when you're talking about trauma and that. What effect do you think that the current grade schools and elementary schools to force children into gender identity, and what effect that has on their self-worth?
Well, let me just tell you, that argument has actually worked. It's a great question, because that argument has found its way into family law. And what we're seeing now is that some families are arguing that the other parent won't allow the gender issue to occur. In other words, there's kids who are
using
young,
it as a lever,
years old, who are being given drugs that stop the development of their biological anatomy, that cannot always be reversed. And in fact, there's some kids now who are adults that have come out and said that, a terrible disservice is being provided to their children. And let me tell you, I worked a lot with the LGBTQ community as an officer in Hollywood. I used to work a lot with kids involved in gangs, kids who ran away from home, kids who were on the streets, obviously. And I was sometimes the officer who told their parents that their children were gay. And I also saw children who were being pushed into coming out as gay when they weren't, and now what we're finding is in this, gender issue that we're describing, it mostly affects girls. And what happens is, I have several cases in which, even the argument of a child, what's your pronoun? Even LinkedIn was doing, what's your pronoun? And I said, female, but I have families who use them and their and themselves. And I think that we and are creating a horrible, horrible
Yeah, no
legacy
kidding.
that will follow this country.
Yeah.
Right now, I have a terrible concern that I've traveled. I have family that lives in Asia, so I go to Asia frequently. Do you know why Asia? And I spent some time in Kunming and Hong Kong, and that's a history that goes back 3,000 years. They have one goal in China, and that's to become the number one world dominant country
Oh
in
yeah.
the world. And they're not, I was there when they elected their president to a lifelong position because they did not want anything to distract them from overtaking the United States. In some respects,
Silk Road. The Silk Road.
There's an amazing documentary that came out on China about all the millionaires being made in China. I have to tell you that in some respects, there's a huge democracy that's taking place that I saw in China from the standpoint, not from the standpoint that families are now able to work multiple jobs. They're creating their own.
Uh-oh, we lost sound.
Work line.
There it is.
You
There
know,
it is.
their country, they gear their military, everything behind producing wheat. They produce everything for milk production with their cows. I watch documentaries that happy cows produce more milk. They're trimming their hoofs. They're feeding their cows really well. They're making sure their cows are happy. Where the United States, we have organic production going on with cows, but China does everything they can to make everything mass produced. So
I've seen the opposite. I've seen the opposite side of that in China when anybody thinks they're humanitarians and compassionate or showing compassion to other species and that, they have a problem with cattle or with pigs. They just burned them with flamethrowers because they didn't want to go through the process of having to test all the pigs for anthrax. We still are the most efficient farmers in the world here in this country.
Well, we do a lot of things efficiently, but now we've become so politicized on everything we do, from the gender issues to farming to water. Farmers aren't able here in California to do farming the way they used to because we've got the drought situations. How do we balance water? I am not saying that I agree with everything that China is doing by any means, but what I'm saying is they are determined to overtake all the countries to be number one dominant. And here we have politicians arguing about whether there should be male or female departments in the department stores. We've become, in some respects, I know I'm getting kind of strong here. We've become the old England of the 1700s when America was working so hard to create an amazing country, amazing opportunities. And we still have amazing opportunities. I'll take my own company. I've gone from using my education as a police officer to trying to making a difference to help families. And there's a lot of other people trying to do the same. But we've become so mired on, downplaying and enforcing the law that we've removed a lot of the abilities for families to become stable in family law, for families to be safe in their communities because we're not enforcing the law, for perjury to be committed, for our politicians. Look at how many politicians are going to jail because they're taking bribes, they're lying about it.
Yeah, and how many aren't going to jail or doing the same thing?
And that's only the fraction. That's only the fraction when we can catch them.
Oh yeah.
And yet, I'll go back to
just
police.
so they know we're watching.
Most enforced. Yeah. We are probably the most enforced and governed agency in the United States. Over judges, oversight over judges, oversight over probation department, oversight, of CEOs. Look at how Bernie Madoff was able to do what he did, because even though people were reporting him, we weren't doing a good job, or the housing market, or Wall Street greed. China right now is being very aggressive, making sure that those things, are trying to do that. And other countries, are trying to make sure that they are enforcing their laws because they know that the best way to succeed is for there to be expectations of politicians to be truthful and to be acting in our best interest. But we've lost sight of our responsibility as voters. Forbes just did an amazing interview in their an article where they talked about, if we're so concerned of crime, why did we just vote in 80% of those people who are going to support defunding the police, defunding our laws?
Well,
Or if you can just print money, why the hell am I paying taxes?
yeah.
I'm sorry,
And-
you were garbled again.
Is it?
I said, it's just like, if you can just print money, why am I paying taxes?
And I'm sorry, you're garbled. One more time.
Well,
I said, if the government can just create money, then what's the need for taxation?
Well, even
Because
look
they
at
didn't get all that money that was given away during the pandemic. People didn't pay that in taxes. They just created that on a computer. It's just
well, let's
pay
face
for the
it.
$1 trillion.
The
There it is.
Republicans and the Democrats are buying votes.
Yeah.
Instead of paying down our debts,
over
what
1
we should be
billion.
doing, we're leaving a legacy where our grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren will be paying off these
That's
trillion-dollar budgets. And who have we borrowed a lot of money from? Other countries outside the United States. If everybody were to, we're in trouble here. We need to get our own house in shape.
You certainly do.
And
Well,
that's why we're here.
that's a good point to wrap this up on. We really appreciate you being on, Kathy.
Absolutely.
Really do.
Absolutely.
Jeff,
You've
you've done
got
me
some
so
great
many favors.
outlook, some great insights into the way things are.
Well,
Yeah.
Jeff, the least I can do, you have given me so many favors and so much of your time and interviews and also advice when I've called you. And in fact, I'm dealing with an abduction issue right now. An American who married abroad, stayed abroad, then the children were kidnapped, and now they've moved back to the United States. And we're working with the State Department, which don't even get me started on that conversation.
Yeah, me neither.
Another interview.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this again. I'll probably get blooped, but the only thing you get from the State Department is the address of the nearest gay bar.
Well, with that said, I would like to at least give my phone number, if I can, to your listeners and my website, which I'm in the process of updating, if I might.
Please do.
So it's
Go ahead.
www.custody, CUSTODY calculations, CALCULATIONS.com. And my phone number, yes, I do answer my phone, although, I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, YouTube, and my phone number is 702-375-9389. That's my corporate number. I have a separate number that I use when I have clients. But, if you have a quick question, I do offer free consults on a very limited basis. And I do try to work on a sliding scale when the company is able to. So with that said, thank you, Jeff, for the plugs, and always great. And drinks are on me next time.
That little commercial blurb on the end, that'll be $25.
Oh, let me take a half hour then. That's the cheapest plug I've ever gotten.
Great talking to you.
Okay,
All
great.
right,
Nice
guys,
talking to you,
thanks.
This amazing podcast has been brought to you exclusively by Toxic Masculinity Whiskey, the whiskey that is the cure for many of the things ailing this country right
Absolutely. Absolutely.
now. You're having issues with gender, Toxic Masculinity will straighten you right out.
Keep it all in hand, children and elderly men.
Yes. So that'll be it for today. We'll see you next time. I believe next time our guest is going to be another special forces operator that has an interesting set of stories to tell.
We've got blackmail material on them.
Run, run, run from the dragon, from the treason. Far enough till I reach your warm season. Run, run, run in the long run, I recall.